The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus said to his disciples, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He takes away every branch in me that does not bear fruit, and every one that does he prunes, so that it bears more fruit. You are already pruned because of the word that I spoke to you. Remain in me as I remain in you. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit on its own unless it remains on the vine, so neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever remains in me and I in him will bear much fruit, because without me you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me will be thrown out like a branch and wither. People will gather them and throw them into a fire, and they will be burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask for whatever you want and it will be done for you. By this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Ego eimi. Ego eimi. There are two Greek words. They mean I, myself. It's how Jesus begins his description of the image of him as the true vine. Ego eimi, I am the true vine. We heard this similar statement last week with the Good Shepherd. Ego eimi, I am the Good Shepherd. I am myself. And so Jesus is describing for us our relationship to him as his disciples. He is the vine, we are the branches. People at the time of Jesus were very familiar with agricultural symbols and images, and this is one. We are the branches on the vine of Jesus, and the Father is the vine grower, and we are called to be open to the Spirit pruning us, just like a grower will prune the vine. So we are called to cooperate with God in being pruned ourselves, so that we are better branches, better disciples, better children of God. And how the pruning occurs is suffering. It's suffering. In this life, we all suffer, all various ways, from little ways to big ways. We suffer throughout our whole lives. Some of our suffering is self-inflicted. We go to school. We get a job. It's difficult. It's challenging. Go in the military. We do things to ourselves, preparing, say, for a sports game in order to get in shape. That can cause a lot of pain and discomfort to be in good athletic condition. But that kind of suffering we do to ourselves. There's also suffering that's done to us by circumstances, by what other people do, events in our lives. Maybe we've had a loss. Maybe we've become ill. So we struggle with that suffering. But that suffering serves a purpose because it prunes us. It prunes us in order to orient us to God. If we did not suffer, we wouldn't need God. We'd be our little tiny images walking around. No relationship with God. But you have a pain, you have a loss, you have something that's happened that is difficult. We have a natural tendency to turn to God. Oh my God is a very common prayer that comes from the lips of even non-believers. And that we're oriented to God, and that occurs through that pruning, making us better branches so that as we live out our lives as disciples of Jesus, we bear fruit, just like that vine puts out fruit for the branches. So through our pruning and our growing in our lives, that we begin to produce good fruit as disciples of Jesus. The first reading, we have the account of St. Paul known as Saul in the beginning. It was his Hebrew name. Paul has come to Jerusalem. As you remember, Paul encountered Jesus on the way to Damascus. He was going to arrest the Christians, bring them in and imprison them and punish them for believing in Jesus. But on the way, he meets Jesus, and it totally changes his life. He has a huge conversion experience, and he begins to believe in the Lord Jesus. He then comes to Jerusalem. Well, they're not going to trust him. He's been the persecutor. He's the one out to arrest them. They don't trust him. But Barnabas, who's one of the leaders of the community, takes Paul under his wing and supports him and integrates him into the community so that Paul can be a member and people not be afraid of him. But Paul's in some ways full of himself. He's got a big ego. He sort of probably talks big. It's all about Paul. And what he does in the process of trying to become a preacher of the gospel is that he enrages some of the people in the community. And they get so mad at him, they decide they're going to kill him. We've had enough of him. Well, the church leaders say, well, this can't happen. We can't have anybody hurting Paul. So they send him home. They send him down from Jerusalem to Caesarea, which was a large port, and they send him back to Tarsus, where he came from. What Paul needs is pruning. He needs to have the Lord work on him, and through his struggles and suffering, begin to orient himself more to Jesus than to himself. That will take 8 years. Paul will stay in Tarsus for 8 years, waiting, time passing, waiting for the call to come from Jerusalem to come back. And the tradition is that he was a tent maker. That's how he supported himself. He made tents. Not very fulfilling, not very spiritual, but it's how he passed his time. 8 years passed. Then in the Acts of the Apostles, there's a wonderful scene in which the sentence is that one day Barnabas is in Tarsus, and he's coming down the street looking for Paul. It's time. Paul has been pruned enough, and now he's ready to come back to Jerusalem to be the great disciple that he will become. But he becomes that disciple through the suffering, through the way that the Lord trims him and prunes him and makes him bear better fruit. And so Paul is a wonderful example of someone who's had that pruning in his life. And so we're called to be pruned as well. How we know that the pruning has occurred is discussed in the second reading from the letter of St. John, in which John says that if you want evidence of your being a disciple of Jesus, look at what you are, look at what you do. Don't think about what you say. Listen, look, watch. Watch what the action is. And it's in that way that we live out the commandment in our lives in a real way, not just saying the right things, not mouthing the right words, but actually living the commandments. And as we've heard the last couple weeks, the two greatest commandments that Jesus reduced down to two, and containing the whole law and the prophets, was love God with all that you are, love your neighbor as if the neighbor were you. And that way we live out the commandments of Jesus and live in peace in the community. And so we are all members then of this vine. We need to be attached to the vine, attached to Jesus, because if we distance ourselves from Jesus and we have no relationship to him, we will die, according to the image that Jesus is talking about. If we're going to be if we're branches, we need to be attached to the vine. If we break ourselves away, we will eventually die without him. It's very important on this day of the children's first communion. We think of them as little leaves on the vine, that they need to be nurtured. They need to be kept safe and taught about Jesus, taught about the Lord, taught about the commandments, so that as they grow up, they become real branches attached to the vine, attached to Jesus, because as parents and grandparents and relatives, you help them with that. You help them attach themselves to the Lord so that for the rest of their lives, they will gain life from the Lord. And so we're all called then to be good branches on the vine, to live out the gospel each day, especially in obeying the commandments, and so that we too can say with Jesus, ego eimi, I am the disciple, I am the branch, and I belong attached to the vine.